Solomon, to introduce yourself a little bit about yourself.
Yes, man. My name's Solomon Adams. I'm an educator, a coach, a mentor, and an artist as well.
So, give me a little bit about your kind of background. What kind of led you to work with young people?
Yeah, man. I spent a lot of my younger years as an artist. I think I got to that last. That's where I spent a lot of my years in the spoken word when I first met you, doing a lot of spoken words, producing, making music a little bit later, DJing, acting. And I found myself to be just a very expressive young person, kind of led by my soul to do a lot of my creative work. And then I got to a phase in my life where I realised quite realistically that art wasn't going to be able to pay the bills just by itself. And I had to think about, cool, how am I going to generate some income, but also have some purpose with what I do as well? So I found teaching art or teaching music was actually a great way to do that. And it took a long time to actually get into that space or get into that field. But I got there eventually, and I a lot of journeys along the way. But I think the main purpose was to serve young people who I saw on a very similar journey that I was on when I was younger, who were soul searching or looking for something else more than they knew, and thinking about how I could support them on that journey. And I think that just started off my curiosity about working with young people and being the best person that I could be to support others, you know?
Yeah. And how was your kind of entry point into it? So after you made that decision, was it quite easy for you to get into it? Was there hurdles, or how was it for you?
I did a lot of agency work initially. I was working with a lot of teaching agencies. You know, there's early phone calls you'd get at 7 a.m. in the morning. You know, you've got to pop in to this school on the other side of London. And I was doing a lot of that, which, you know, again, being an artist, I just liked having my own schedule. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was, I guess that was starting to build on me, that level of discipline, thinking about, cool, I've got to get to this school at this time, and I've got to connect with these students who I haven't met before, and maybe that's it. That day is it. And then I go to another school the next day. And then I eventually found myself in a school in Feltham, a Pupil Referral Unit, where I then spent about 6 to 7 months before the head teacher gave me an application form and told me to apply for the role, because they thought I was doing really, really well.
Yeah.
And my journey continued from there.
A few people I spoke to who work in Proust, their entry has been similar. You know, like another friend of mine had a similar kind of entry where he was working in the Proust as a almost like a substitute teacher, so to speak, like kind of freelance agency work. And then after a period of time, he was doing good work and he was kind of invited in. So what were your first reflections of the Proust?
Challenging, man.
Yeah.
Super, super challenging. It's ironic, it was a primary Pru, which I hadn't heard of up until that point. I'd heard of Prus which hold teenage students, you know, teenage young people, but to be working with 5-year-olds who've been excluded from primary school was very strange to me at that point in time. Challenging.
Yeah. I think, as someone who's worked in the Pru myself a little bit, I think challenging is definitely the key word for it. I think until you work there, then you really know kind of, for me, what goes on there. For me, it's almost it's like a different world. You know, like in regards of what goes there, and some of them, I mean, not all of them, for me, some of them unfortunately seems to be like a dumping ground for young people. It's almost like young people who haven't managed to kind of engage in very different parts of mainstream education just get put there. You know, and some of them say they do one thing, but they don't always do what they say they do. You know, so that's unfortunately my kind of experiences of some of them. And it's not, I don't always feel like it's the organisation's fault in itself. I think sometimes they're put in a very tricky position, you know, because sometimes some of the kids they're working with, for example, are kind of in the process of getting a diagnosis for various different condition statements or whatever, but they have to work with them almost within that period, which can be difficult, because sometimes it's easier to work with somebody once you kind of know the parameters of what you're working. if you don't, it can be quite tricky. And sometimes that's the reason for me why they have trouble in the mainstreams kind of in the first place. You know, so I think my feelings as a concept, I think it's a really good concept, alternative provision, because I've always had a feeling for me the mainstream doesn't work the way it should do. You know, so some of my beliefs has been, it was, when you think about how it was in its inception, how it started, it hasn't changed much since then. But for me, you look at society as a whole, it's changed massively. You know, in regards of our knowledge, how we interact, even just the young people that you have to deal with has changed dramatically. But I think I'm not sure the system has kind of caught up, you know, to what's going on. And that for me is one of the reasons why I say a lot of people slipping through the net for me when it comes to like education wise. You know, because it's a very strict and narrow way of kind of succeeding or judging people.
Hey, man, it's something I've noticed. A lot of teachers, and I was one of them, not in touch with the reality of what the students are actually dealing with on a day-to-day basis, as you said. And I mean, I've experienced and advocated for in schools I've worked in is cultural competency. You know, it's really important about cultural competency around ensuring that the students you're working with are the experts.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? They're the experts. They're the people that we can lean on in order to gather how we need to teach, as opposed to being taught how to teach from a UCL, for example, Institute of Education, and using that as the forefront of when you enter into a classroom, actually connecting with those young people, building that relationship as the key element of any people work that we're thinking about doing, and then listening to them and seeing what they need from you, as opposed to you or us or me telling them what they need. Savior complex.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's can get really, really tricky, and I've witnessed it many a time, specifically in PRUs, specifically in APs, where dealing with young people who've experienced trauma at very young ages, who are going through all types of difficulties and challenges, and there can be that desire that comes up to want to save a young person from the circumstance or situation they're in, as opposed to empowering them to stand up in the situation that they're in and claim their power back.
Yeah.
You know, from a situation, from a circumstance that may have taken their power away from them. Actually, me going in, or a teacher going in, or anybody going into that environment and thinking, not being clear on their intention, and thinking, you know what, I'm going to go in and save this young person.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I'm going to be the person who you know, does, and it I guess some of that can seem like it's coming from a good place.
Yeah.
But actually the negative effects of that, and it bypasses that building of relationship.
Yeah.
And that real valuing of a young person's whole experience. You know, that communicates to the young person, you know, I see you, I value you, you are of importance.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Before, let me try and save you.
Yeah.
You know, let me try and offer you this framework or this tool or this strategy, you know, to getting past, you know, the difficulty you're facing. And so we're like quick on like the intervention.
Yeah.
Be quick on the intervention, quick on, you know, all of these things that we can put in place. But actually, where's the relationship? Where's the actual connection with these people?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of kind of gems you were saying there. I think one of the important things to me is the awareness as well, because I think a lot of people probably come into it from that savior perspective, which for me is, there's almost nothing wrong with it, you know, but it's at one point in time do you become aware of that so that you can actually do something about it and now, you know, kind of readdress the situation, because I think it's one of those, as I was saying before, because it's like a vocational profession. A lot of people come from something to do with that's linked to their personal life. You know, so a lot of kind of like wounded helpers Like you get a lot of, for example, people who have had like almost may have had negative experiences within the kind of education system, and now reflecting on that, and then now more trying to rewrite their wrong. You know, so they're not giving themselves the right distance. You know, it's still really about them. They're actually trying to heal themselves. They're actually thinking about, you know what, my experience, how it was at school, and they think by doing that somehow you're going to rewrite this wrong. When ultimately, what you probably should be doing in that situation is working on yourself first, and then going into like that type of environment with a lot more kind of knowledge. But what I've noticed that a lot of these systems are quite desperate. You know, like because it is not for a lot of teachers. I would imagine, for example, it's not your first place to work. It's not your first choice. You know, when you went in your teacher training, you wanted to be a science teacher, whatever it is. You know, I'd imagine in your dreams you'd be working in this fully equipped lab, full of fully engaged students that want to learn and so on and so forth. So that's what I think your target is, and then you end up maybe working in a alternative provision, which is a lot of the ones that I've seen are not on kind of purposely built sites. They're normally places where you kind of reconvene to be something. You know, so I worked at one, for example. It was like an office building. You know, so wasn't the whole building wasn't designed to be a school. So there is your issue, that like from the jump, and then you have like the knock-on issues almost off the back of that. You know, their so-called playground was almost a car park. There was no greenery. It was just almost. I think the closest thing you can link it to is prison. You know, that's what it looked like. You know, it was like caged in. It was all concrete. And for me, my kind of reflections are then, how do you expect the young person to feel in that moment? You know, you're almost like it's pre-prison. It's like, are you just trying to get them used to this environment? You know, and then how are you confused or you don't understand when they don't react how you want them to react? You know, most of us want to learn in suitable environments. You know, we all want things around us in order for us to be our best selves, and for those who are already starting off at a disadvantage, then how hard is it now for them? You know, so I think if you've got all the tools available, it's hard enough. But if you don't, you're really struggling. You've got a lot of issues. You've got trauma that you haven't dealt with, and now you put into those environments. You know, it can be quite tricky. You know, I worked in one place, for example. I remember I went into the classroom and I saw the teachers reading a newspaper in the corner. You know, that if I was he's concerned, and he said that, you know, he said that he's getting paid whether or not you guys learn or not. I never forget that when a young person told me that, I was thinking like why would you even say that? To almost like to a young person, it's like what do you expect them to do in that moment? That's not going to motivate them to learn. You know, that's not like whatever I could imagine as a teacher, you do actually want to teach that person. You do want to motivate them, but the tools and strategies that you're using are never going to work. And that's one of my main issues with them. On the flip side of that, I've definitely been in a few with some really good staff, really motivated staff that are actually really trying to make a change. You know, I think one thing that I have noticed though, and this might not be the same for a lot of them, is that a certain type of person for me always gets put on behavior management. Yeah, so that's just my personal kind of reflections. Even as someone going into one, you know, I think I went in as whatever role. I can't remember what the role was, my key worker or whatever the role was, but quickly due to my appearance and my size and whatever else, you know, I was almost put on behavior management duty, so to speak. You know, if there was any like a behavior management issue, I'm the person now. Let's go and get him and so on and so forth. You know, and I noticed that wherever I look, because I've worked in a few different ones as well, so I've seen a few in operations, like even some that are all white, so to speak. The behavior management person would be black. You know, So I'm not sure what that says about the system, what that says about the organization. For example, what they're located into that person, or what they're saying this black person is here for. You know, but that is definitely something that I've seen and I thought like, wow. So it's just how will you, as an organization, seeing this? It is your first line of defense. Almost, it is your punching bag. Is this person put in this position to just take all the stuff that you don't want to take? You know, then they have to hold that just so that you don't have to deal with it.
When I was placed in this role at the primary Peru, man, I was in the same position. I was in the exact same position, behavior management. I ended up becoming a team teach trainer. So I ended up having to train other members of staff, not only within our provision, but actually across the borough of Hounslow, to effectively de-escalate behavior. And also when it came to physical intervention, how to do that effectively and safely.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, it's really, really ironic. Really, really ironic to have ended up in that situation, remembering going into that, learning it, saying that I don't want to do this. You know, I don't want to be doing this, especially the physical intervention. I like the de-escalation side, but the physical intervention piece, not fitting. You know, not fitting, not being comfortable for me, not being comfortable for the young people. It being something that I guess serves the larger vision or purpose of the organisation, the almost the day-to-day operation of a school, of a Peru, of a business. I guess there's a reflection I'm having about, in terms of what you said, like schools or Prus or APs, especially this Pru that you mentioned being like a prison, no greenery, a car park, you know, office building, that kind of environment. And it being schools and these places being based on outcome as opposed to the journey, as opposed to the journey of education. And actually, sure, if we're wanting young people, we're not, again, clear of where we want young people to go with their education, we're not aware of the bigger vision of what education can be, then sure, place them in an office building. Sure, you know, give them, you know, playtime in a car park, you know, where there's a couple cars there. Because actually, that's where they're going to end up. They're going to end up in an office building if that's, you know, what we're intending, you know, without thinking about that, without being aware of that. You know, they're going to end up in a car park, you know, parking the cars in the car park, going into the office building. But actually, what about, there's two pieces. Like, what about, firstly, the well-being of the staff?
Yeah.
I mean, the well-being of our staff and how they show up and what do they need to put in place in order to make sure that they're good, scratch good, great, before they go into these provisions and these schools. And then how does that then overflow into this next generation that we're serving? You know, that we're not training up or alone, just training up, or we're just educating, but we're serving. When I think about this work that we do, you know, where we've met and the work that we've done together, we're serving the next generation. So actually with that comes a different level of devotion or commitment to what you're doing. And knowing that, you wouldn't just put yourself in a position where you're going into a school and you're dealing with your own traumas or difficulties. You mentioned the wounded helpers, you know, you wouldn't just enter into a space without, I hope people wouldn't, but it happens. You know what I mean? I hope people wouldn't just enter into a space where they're wounded and they're trying to help because they're trying to heal their own wounds. It's not conducive to a learning, healthy learning environment, you know. It's creates a really dark, can create a real dark learning environment. 100%. And on the surface level, we've got, you know, all the curriculum, all the teaching, all the, you know, the great learning happening, but actually the energy or the spirit of a classroom, the soul of a classroom is in that relationship. Do you know what I mean? Is in that connection, is in the undercurrent of not what's on the whiteboard or what's being spoken about, but the feeling when you walk into that room. How do the young people feel? You know, can the young people raise their hand to ask a question? Do you know what I mean? Is the teacher going to ignore them? Do you know what I mean? Do the students in the class have a relationship with each other? Or are they trying to one-up each other? Is that the environment that's been created? Because if they're trying to one-up each other in the classroom, then look what that leads to later on in life. You know, when as adults, we've got adults who are trying to one-up each other in the workplace and, you know, overperforming, you know, and lacking authenticity in order to try and appease a boss in a similar way that, you know, a young person was trying to appease their teacher.
Yeah.
There's layers and levels to this, man.
Yeah, no, I think for me as well, one of the key things, even the key questions, I think what you said is almost like, what is school for? And I think sometimes when I think about myself, when I complain about the system, sometimes I have to remind myself what it was designed for. You know, because it may be fit for purpose. It may be I just disagree with the purpose. You know, that might be almost like what's going on, because ultimately the school system in the UK, for example, was designed to provide people to work in factories, places of employment, and so on and so forth. So that's why it was designed that way. You know, but obviously we know that just from a United Kingdom perspective, the workforce doesn't look like that no more. So there's no more factories, for example. Yeah. So why hasn't the system changed? You know, especially in the day that we live in now, post-COVID. You know, in regards of like working from home at a literally all-time high, doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon. You know, things haven't kind of changed for that. And I think that is for me some of the issues where a lot of people get confused. You know, because they think school should be what it should be, if that makes sense. So I think people feel that school should be a place, for example, where young people are kind of almost like groomed to be good members of society. You know, where they should be like places of where they feel supported, where they learn new things, where they get an overall education almost about the next step of life that they're going to be going into when they leave. And ultimately, that's not, for me, what happens a lot of times. And what I've seen, what I feel goes on a lot for me is almost like babysitting. I feel like there's various babysitting at very different levels. So it's like everybody's just okay as long as they don't almost act up now. You know, so infant school, primary school, whatever, their jurisdiction is that time. It's all they care about. As long as they can get them to that point, then their job's done. Then it's now somebody else's problem. Then they go to secondary school, college, university, whatever, so on and so forth. No one's looking at it almost holistically, for example, or you would look at raising your own kids. You wouldn't look at your own kids, for example, and be thinking, I'm only concerned from 0 to 5. After 5, it's a wrap, you're on your own. Most parents know that, for example, when you do have kids, it's almost like a lifetime commitment now. As long as you're alive, you're almost there to help and support them in whatever way you can. But I think as a society, that's not what we're doing. You know, it's just the system has been, for me, not working for a number of years. But I always feel like it's fear-based. Why it's not changed.
Something you mentioned earlier really, really resonated. It made me think about the suppression of what is real in human beings when they enter educational institutions. The suppression of that in order for us to get through this next stage. To get from 0 to 5, to get from 5 to 11, to get from 11 to 16, to get from 16 to 19. And in order for the outcome to be met, in order for us to be able to get from A to B, certain things need to get done. Certain things need to get focused on. Certain things need to get cut. I get that. Do you know what I mean? I get that. That makes sense. Also need to be super mindful of what impact that has on real people who are not adults yet, who are growing up, who are learning about the world as they're going through these systems. And if certain parts of them are being suppressed, not listened to, not served, then we're contributing to chaos, in my perspective. You know what I mean? The education system is not actually serving, as you've said, the future of where these young people want to be going. You know what I mean? Where they actually want to be going, what they want to be doing is not serving we're talking about the mainstream education system, but it's not serving new jobs that are coming up. It's not serving the changes in industry. I think there's this big focus on STEM at the moment, which is amazing, which is great, but that isn't it. Do you know what I mean? That isn't it. And what about young people who are not skilled in that or interested in those types of things? What about actually offering them support in other areas and actually the wraparound support that could see them thrive in the creative industry?
It's like how invested are we in a better society?
And what actions do we take that actually align with that?
Yeah. It's exactly that. Where are we just going to say, push the blame and focus on one place? Or the resources in one place? Or are we going to try and actually, put some resources somewhere? But as I said, I just feel like a lot of the issue for me is, even on the government level for me, it's like short-termism. As I said, most people are just trying to do good for their term. So if they know they're going to be in for 4 years, they're trying to do a job for 4 years, a good job for 4 years, or it's a career for a lot of these people. So almost like they want to be like the Minister of Education, for example, might not even really care about education. He sees it as a route to be the Prime Minister. And that for me is like one of the massive issues. It's like the same like what I said for me with the drama teacher. For me, it's like almost the same thing. For me, I always thought like, if you're running a department of business, for me, you should have run a business. It's just like almost like, it's almost common sense to me. If you're running the Department of Education, you should have been a head teacher. You should have had something to do with education before that point. So now you can bring something to that role. Not you were just the MP for West Ham, and then you was the MP for this person, and now you're Department of Education. Next year you're you're part of the Treasury or whatever. For me, then as I said, I just don't really believe you. I just don't believe you really care about what you're talking about. Like, you've not like showed me anything that shows me, that you're invested in this. And I think that's where obviously a lot of people, I know it's almost a sidetrack, but a lot of people get disillusioned with the kind of politics from that perspective. Because I said that there's no kind of authenticity. And that is why even like, if you look over in the US, for example, like people like, for me, Donald Trump can get so popular, because it's like, when there's no authenticity, sometimes you just can buy it. Just any authenticity is good. You're just so used to lies. That someone telling the truth, even if you don't even agree with the truth, people buy into that as, but at least he's real, which is sad, because not just because someone's real, and imagine some of the most evilest dictators in history have been real, so but that's the it's a massive issue. So going back to what we said about the alternative kind of provisions, what how long was you there in total working in the Peru?
I was in the Peru for 7 years. 7 years before I left, man. Man.
And what would you change? Like, if you could change anything, a few things, what would it be?
I think more time with the students, getting a general interest in who they are, who they'd like to become, and talking to them about what skills and support they would need to get there. In my role, as I mentioned, I was teaching music. It got to a point where shortly after I'd started, we had a new head teacher join. He'd invested in these iMacs and microphones and all these types of things. And being the music producer that I was at the time and still am, I was intrigued about actually giving young people this access, obviously exploring music, but also to exploring what their voice sounds like when they're able to express themselves outside of a traditional classroom setting. So there's one young man that I specifically worked with, and he was one of those challenging young people who couldn't remain in a class any longer than an hour, any longer than half an hour at certain points. So there was a specific time frame, a number of weeks, where he would come into school and he would come into what became the music room. It was once a library, but then became the music room. I had the Mac in there, the music production software, some equipment that I brought from home, and this young man who was interested in learning the bass guitar at the time. And in that space, there was an opportunity for him to really start expressing who he wanted to become, what he was interested in doing, certain things that he had been through, and what he didn't want to repeat. And what became really, really apparent and really clear was that he had a really strong why, or a really strong motivation for what he wanted to do next and how that was going to get into his next step. That wasn't the purpose of my intervention or the work that I was doing with him. But in just that one-to-one time and that building relationship and him finding this real love for music as a resource, as a strategy for him to be able to express things that he didn't feel comfortable expressing before, there was a new light in his eyes, and a real gratitude for life and, his opportunity to be able to experience something new in what was a school setting, which is, for me, was different because, working in that space, I was a mentor, I was working as a teaching assistant at the time, and I'm sitting in classrooms supporting students, getting on with the curriculum, whether it's the maths work, the English work, science, etc., languages, all these different types of things. And this is a young man who actually, because of the situation and circumstance he was in with his behaviour, had an entire day where we were just able to make music. And actually the things he was able to learn about himself in that time, because he was able to express himself and get real clarity on his thoughts, his way of thinking. It was almost like every time we got into the studio, the music room, he was journaling. Like, it was an opportunity for him to journal and be like, what do you want to write about today? And I'd put together a small beat that he could then write to, or he'd write something before coming in, and then we turn it into an entire track. And over that entire period of time, there was so much that now I reflect on that was valuable in terms of the quote-unquote soft skills. We've spoken about these before. I don't like to use the term soft skills, real-world skills that were forming in him. His ability to be adaptable, his ability to manage his emotions, to be emotionally intelligent, his ability to be flexible, his ability to manage time effectively. If I said to him, listen, it's break time in a little bit, do you know what I mean? You're either going to get your break, or if you skip this period and you could run over by making music, that you're not going to have any break at all. So he's like, cool, okay, we've got 5-10 minutes, let's try wrap this up in 5-10 minutes, do you know what I mean? And all of those types of small details don't get picked up if we don't give young people agency. So I think if I was to change something within APs, PRUs, it's those types of practical learning experience, whether it's project-based learning, whether it's actual learning which is based around a project, which gives young people agency and ownership and sees them as the owner of their own learning experience. And from that, then they feel valued, they feel honoured, they show up differently. You know what I mean? I've witnessed young people who show up significantly differently. I've had colleagues tell me, that this same young man that I worked with was hell to work with. Do you know what I mean? In staff rooms, hell, and was not, necessarily the most easiest person to work with. But actually, when I was able to work with him, I have no idea what you're talking about until I saw it. Until I saw it in the corridors. Until I get both perspectives. But there's a curiosity around, why do young people show up in different ways in different spaces, both in different physical spaces, but then also being aware of the emotional space they might be in when they enter into a physical space. You know, so there's certain classrooms or certain settings or certain relationships that may lead to young people feeling a certain emotion. That emotion may be addictive, you know. So they walk into a classroom, they don't like maths because they might not be good at maths, you know. But actually, instead of speaking about that and having the confidence to talk about that, it's difficult to be that emotionally aware at such a young age. So they might while out, you know. They may not want to do the work, you know. They may ignore the teacher or try to crack jokes in the classroom. And actually, every time now they walk through that door, they feel sadness as maybe a core emotion that's going on. And then they might mask that up with some anger or some banter, some humour. But actually, we're, as teachers or educators, there's always that conversation about what's the need behind the behaviour, right? What's the need behind the behaviour? And when you're able to really just slow down and like leave the stuff on the whiteboard, like leave that, that's cool, that's good, we'll get to that. How are you all today? How are we? You know, how are you? Talk to me, how are you? And check in and really see how people are doing before we just go into content and trying to fill people up with stuff, which is helpful, yes, but it's not all there is. You know, education is this wholesome, holistic, beautiful thing that doesn't just take place from, you know, 0 to 19 or 25 or, you know, whenever you choose to finish education. It's something which is a lifelong experience, you know. And actually being super intentional about embedding those real world skill development opportunities into the curriculum, whether it's the, you know, the SMSC curriculum or it's the PSHE curriculum or it's an alternative curriculum that actually serves who young people will be becoming. You know, we're aware they're going to be becoming adults, so actually let's prepare them to be flexible, to be aware that the world is going to change. There's going to be big changes that they have to deal with, and how do we prepare them for that? Like the reality of the world as it is, not this office building, these four walls, you know, this, you know, only speak when you're spoken to, you know, only put your hand up, you know, when it's time to put your hand up, only go outside when it's time to go outside. You know, there's more, there's a lot more.
Yeah, no, definitely. You know, I mean, you can agree with that. You know, I think one of the things I was thinking as well, what there needs to be more of is there's almost like more support for the transitional periods. You know, because when I think of, like you said, you was in a primary school pre, or that age pre, should I say, that leap between primary school and secondary school. Not all kind of local authority schools, for example, provide enough support to transition into that next phase.
Yeah.
You know, because even when I think about my own memories in regards to it, I can still remember the feelings. You know, that big massive jump from primary school to secondary school. You know, that primary school feeling is almost feels more contained. You know, you're in one room with one group of people for the whole day. That's your tribe. You know, so break time, you go out, come back, you're just with those people, and you kind of progress through the years. You go secondary school, it's a big, massive. I just remember it looking massive. You know, you're now in another class with different group of people. Now you're in another class every hour, different groups of people, different teachers. The focus is different. The pressure is more intense. You know, I don't remember when I was in primary school, for example, doing many tests or anything like that. I remember doing a few tests, but it wasn't pressurized tests. You know, when you get to secondary school, that level of pressurization kind of goes up. You know, and then everything what kind of comes kind of with that. You know, so I do think there needs to be more programs that kind of address that transition. You know, or more support as well for if we are really trying to reintegrate young people who are, for example, in alternate provision back into so-called mainstream provision. There needs to be a lot more support regarding that process as well, because the two worlds are totally different. You know, and I've seen so many examples, or heard so many stories of people not succeeding when they've transitioned back into the mainstream. You know, and a lot of that is based on obviously the experience what they was having in the total provision. It's just almost like totally different. Sometimes, for example, in the total provision, they might have had class sizes of 11. You know, back into the mainstream, back to 30. You know, in the class sizes of 11, where you may have been like flourishing, you know, it's quite easier, should I say, to get like help and support from a teacher, because obviously there's not as many people to deal with. And even sometimes in those class sizes, in the smaller class sizes, there's also additional support sometimes in that space as well.
It's true.
You know, so you might have somebody supporting behaviour and stuff like that as well, and or mentors and things kind of that nature. And then now, when they transition back, now all that disappears. It's almost just left now, just to deal with it. You know, so I think definitely a lot more support needs to come for those kind of transitional periods. And I was thinking in regards of what you were saying, being as it coming from that kind of primary year through, do you think enough focus and resource goes to that age group when they're having difficulties? Because I remember even before I met you, I'm not sure how aware I was that even existed. So I always feel sometimes when you're not aware something existed, who else isn't aware? What other form of neglect is that kind of space getting? You know, because it's almost like outside, out of mind. You know, things ain't talked about. No one really does anything about it. You know, but the fact that AP was existed, it must have existed for a reason. You know, but is it just almost hidden? Is that just a part of the system, for example, that no one really knows about? So therefore, no one cares about it, and no one actually does the required help that needs to be done in order for those kind of guys to really succeed.
It's a good question. It's not something. Yeah, before I worked there, and I should have prefaced to say that in the 7 years that I was working for this service, it was an entire provision. I spent 2 years in the primary pro and then 5 years in a mental health provision, which was for young people in secondary school. So I made the shift from primary to secondary. But in the primary pro, in terms of the support for them, it seemed great. It seemed like great wraparound support. It actually, to be honest with you, Carl, it seemed was better and well equipped than the secondary school pros that I were in. And I say that just because there's something about the primary education system, even though I spent, you know, minimal amount of time there, but I think a lot of that, ironically, working in that environment is part of what's led to me to become the resilient person I am and educator that I am. And a lot of the primary school experience when dealing with challenging behaviour improves is that conversation, like being able to level with a young person when they're dysregulated and, you know, the anxiety is spiraling, or they're super angry, or, you know, they're just jovial and super hyped up and excited. There's not that level of ease where you can level with a young. Sometimes if they're a year 6, sure, or year 5. But when you're working with the younger age groups, there's less likely to be able to do that. Sometimes you've got to wait a whole day or a whole week to be able to have that conversation with them. But the primary pros, another thing that they do succeed and do well in is play. And I think that being obviously a great functioning model of any educational system is actually that leads to this kind of like freeness, or this space where even though they are in a pupil referral unit, they have this access to a beautiful playground. They have this access to dedicated and committed practitioners who are actually looking to offer amazing activities during break times and during lunch times. And what I found was that the organisation of, you know, at certain points different classes would go to lunch while certain people had access to the playground. So they'd almost have exclusive access to a playground area to do their badminton or their tennis or their football or their dodgeball or the races or whatever it is, you know. And they really did enjoy that. And I do remember that being a highlight of their experience when I was there. You know, actually, them really, really looking forward to their breaks and playtimes, and that's something which, I guess, when you start thinking about secondary crews or secondary education, secondary school education, that there's less of that desire. Like, I noticed it, you know, when I worked in the secondary crew, when I shifted in 2020 to working, you know, with older children, when it came to break time, a lot of them want to just stay in the classroom.
Yeah.
A lot of them want to stay inside and just sit. You know what I mean? It's like, go and play, go and have fun, like, go and enjoy yourself. But there is that, I guess, that part of adolescence where, you know, you started to notice your place in the world and how you show up, and you know, that desire to want to be cool, you know, whatever that looks like, whatever that might mean for a certain young person. So it's primary crew is definitely being resourced in play and making that part of the educational experience beautiful. I think that's something that if we can look at and explore how secondary school education can do more of that, or embed more of that into how, because as you mentioned, like, having a car park as a playground is you know, that's tragic.
Yeah.
That's really, really tragic. So,
And I've seen it a couple of times as well.
yeah.
That's the almost the sad part of it. You know, is that if I saw it once, then I could say it's like an anomaly. You know, I've seen it a good few times, and even with secondary schools, one thing that I noticed is that spaces are getting smaller and smaller. So a lot of these new school buildings that they've been built, for example, I think from the outside, some of them look fantastic.
Yeah, it's true.
But some of them on the inside, you know, in regards to play, what you're talking about, almost the importance of play, the space is needed. Some of them don't have the space. You know, because they were literally built on an existing site. So there was already something there before. So there were already kind of constraints there. You know.
What about, like, resourcefulness though? Like, I'm just as we're speaking about this, I'm wondering, does it require a playground? Does it require, like, this large space? It's like, even if the students are gonna spend time in the classroom, right? What's in the classroom, or what kind of setup, or what kind of structures are in the classroom to ensure that young people can still have a transition from, you know, schoolwork, assignments, tasks, teacher talking, to play and relaxation, and to well-being time, and to rest from that other thing, you know. It doesn't always necessarily need, ideally, it'd be great, go out and, you know, have a huge playground, but actually some teachers put on a movie, you know, they have movie club and
I think
clubs
a lot of that stuff for me is as important. You know, I've seen a lot of schools do well with that as well, with kind of sensory rooms and you know, just different spaces, you know, where you go in there, just a couch, some games, so on and so forth. So yes, so I think definitely the balance for me is key. But I think going outside for me is really important. Moving for me is really important as well. So for me, if you've got like a big space indoors and you can do that for me, that's perfectly fine. But for me, unfortunately, what a lot of I've seen is that, like, when they do allocate these rooms, it's like it used to be a cupboard. It's just some room that, like, you know, because space is really precious in a lot of these buildings, you know. So even as someone who used to go in there and deliver various different interventions, sometimes even getting a room would be dramas, you know, because you just didn't have the spare rooms, you know. So I think that for me is the issue as well, is that if you are going to have it internal, is it internal space? Is it kind of fit for purpose as well? And like for me, as I said, in regards of like the outside, how the importance of movement, because even like yourself, for example, you know, maybe we're going to speak about this a little bit later, but you know, you did the retreat that I was fortunate enough to go on. You know, it was an amazing experience. Part of that, you did that outside, and obviously there's a reason. You know, at the time I remember I didn't want to go outside. I was quite happy in the warmth, you know. But when you go outside, it's like then you appreciate it. you breathe differently.
Yeah.
You act differently. Everything changes. So given that opportunity just to do that, even just to be in nature like that, I think as it is really important. I went to when I was in primary school. I was fortunate that my primary school had 2 playgrounds and a massive garden. The back of
I said 2 playgrounds.
at the back of the garden, but you couldn't go you couldn't go to the 2 playgrounds.
Okay.
So it was like for different years. So one group were going one group were going the other. So you didn't have access to the 2.
Okay.
But you would have once you progress through the years.
Fair.
So you start off in a small playground. I remember my older brother, he was in a bigger playground looking through the gates and dreaming of what's it going to be like when you get to the other side and then so to speak. But then we had a massive garden and a hill at the end of it at an area called the wild area where they just let nature just take course, things grow. All those things for me were really important. Not at the time, I just took it for granted.
Sure.
But as I got older and worked in some of these other establishments, I've seen, but you ain't even got. I remember that feeling of just rubbing my hand in the grass, so to speak. All of that for me is missing. Like some of that is good for even grounding people.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about transitional from rooms to rooms, for example, sometimes that's what a breaks are for, or should be used for. Is that for grounding? It's that separating. Okay, maths stressful. Let me now have a grounding experience, balance, and go back. Now when I go into English now, I'm ready for English. Not I just feel like I've been in this treadmill the whole day of traumatic experiences, and now what can happen at the end of it. So that's my only issue with it. And as I said, like I've just seen so many schools now, have like smaller kind of play areas. Where it could be it doesn't always end well. So you were saying as well, you were there for kind of in alternative vision for 7 years. As a kind of worker in that kind of space, as a kind of educator, what support do you think would have helped you within those kind of 7 years?
It's really good, man. Coaching. I think coaching, a lot of what I do now is coaching both young people but also staff in my new role as a manager of a youth centre. This amazing youth centre in West London. Coaching, mentoring, supervision, like real supervision, not supervision that's based around the well-being of the worker, the educator. I think that, they offer employee assistance services and those types of things, but I always felt those things to be quite trite and just like not exactly the right fit for me personally. I remember being offered employee assistance services, what's it called, employee assistance program, EAPs.
Yeah.
And looking at pictures of people who could offer me counselling or consultation or therapy, quote unquote, and knowing that I wouldn't feel comfortable speaking to this person who doesn't look like me, again, this similar educational system that I'm in being reflected in the actual service that's being offered to me from a program, that is actually all it's based on is just getting me back to being right so that I can serve the organisation.
Yeah.
Not to actually serve and support me holistically, but to just allow me to just serve the organisation's vision and ethos, which is that conducive to me? Do I feel cared about? And if I don't feel cared about, then sure, I can go to work and I've got my clear why and my purpose for working with young people. But actually, if I'm not feeling cared about, what impact does that then have on the work that I do when I'm working with young people? And actually, you mentioned earlier, those teachers who in the staff have their newspapers. Was it in staff rooms or
Oh
in
no,
classrooms?
yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, that was in the classroom.
In
Yeah.
the classroom. So just reading the newspaper, because I'm burnt out, and actually I need this time. I've got a bunch of students in front of me, but actually, you know what? No, I need this time. Not even to read the newspaper. I can't even read the newspaper right now, but I just need this time to just turn off.
Yeah.
At times, and it's. I think it's those types of things, like real. I'm an advocate. I'm a massive advocate for wellbeing spaces. The reason why I set up the retreat and I run my organization, Movement Makers, is firstly, the main focus of it is to show young people that there's another option to what they've been shown, to what they've been given. But of course, we can't only just serve young people and forget about the communities they come from and what's raising them up to become the young people that they are. So a lot of that work then transitioned into well-being programs, well-being circles, specifically men's well-being circles. Then we ran, the men's well-being retreat, and actually having spaces where people can come together, drop off all of the facade, all of the mask, and be with themselves, truly, and be with each other, and to feel the fear of that, because there's a lot that can come up when that happens, when you're actually just like in a space which is not a normal space that you're in. It's very comfortably. We had the nice sofas, and we had the nice chairs and all these types of things. We had all of these interesting discussions and conversations. We popped outside for walks and hikes, and we did all of these activities. And I think there's something about state change, about actually like being able to change both the physical state that someone's in. You mentioned that movement, actually being able to get into your body and move, being able to change someone's intellectual state. So actually like whatever is being studied in order to become a teacher, or the given curriculum, actually let's expand a little bit past that. And actually, why did I get into education? I got into education because at my early stages, I was a wounded helper, ironically. And I remember that being a massive part of me, and actually healing that through the work that I was doing wasn't enough. And I realised that wasn't enough quite early on, because actually it wasn't able to sustain me in certain spaces. And actually I thought about it at certain points that I actually wanted to stop working in education. I didn't think I could do it, until I realised that actually there's a lot more that I can offer. There's a lot more that I can do. There's a lot more to who I am. And that I'm actually this holistic person, that's not just educator, that isn't just artist, that is both educator and artist. And outside of that, I'm a human being, and I'm a spiritual person, and I've got all these aspects to me. So actually having a space where I can embody all of that and be in that, reading, studying different things which interest me, and then bringing that into what I do as an educator, as a coach, as a mentor, not bringing in my, political stance or my spiritual perspectives or anything like that, and teaching young people, but just showing up authentically as an educator, like this is who I am. I'm a human being first. So when I'm working with young people, guess what? You're going to see my flaws. Because guess what? The reality of the world is we're going to see each other's flaws. I'm going to see your flaws, you're going to see my flaws. So let's start there. And I think that's just how I am as a person. It's how I tend to build relationships with young people, get them to see me as me. Still got the boundary there. The boundary's clear. But you're going to see me as me. Yeah. I'm not going to put on, you know what I mean? And I can't. So the well-being spaces, the retreats, these types of offerings that give staff, that give workers, that give people who want to work in these spaces time to really check in with themselves and check in with who they are. So that when they've got clarity on, where we ended at with that retreat is, what's your mission, what's your vision, what's your purpose, having that real clear idea around what that is in a really tangible way, then following actions that align with that. And actually then the wounding is no longer what's leading you, but the mission is now what leads us. You know, the mission is now what leads us forward. We're now walking with clear intention, with clear vision, with clear clarity. And, you know, when we fall off track, we've got that mission written down. Like, it's actually written down on my phone, on my tablets, up in you know, it's up in my workplace at the moment. You know, I actually can look at it every time I come in. And sometimes when stuff gets difficult, it gets challenging, I'm like, that's what I'm here for. You know, and actually the mission isn't attached just to the space that I work in. It's who I am, wherever I am. Which is a bit of a bigger conversation, I guess, in terms of, you know, like, why we do the jobs we do, and you know, like, I had personally had to move from definitely being, you know, the wounded helper, and erasing both of those words. I don't want to be wounded or a helper. Yeah. To now being a person who leads from assistance. I want to assist young people, not help them. I'm not trying to help you. I'm trying to assist you. Yeah. Where you trying to get to? You trying to get over here? Okay. Let me see if I can assist you. Let me see if I can support you on your journey to get to where you want to get to. If you don't want the assistance, I can't force my assistance on you. But I'm here. When you're ready, I'm here.
You briefly just mentioned two of the things, what you do. So I want you to just elaborate a little bit more on that, you know. So speak about, for example, a little bit more about your motivation for doing a retreat. You know, how you think it went. You know, the plans to do more. And similar with movement makers as well.
Yeah, man. Cool. Movement makers was started from a love for hip hop as a consciousness, as a way of being, over it just being music, which is about shaking ass and selling drugs and taking drugs and all of the things that hip hop often gets connected to or correlated with. Intelligent movement, hip, to be in the know, hip hop movement. That was it. So my business partner John and I, we bonded, you know, as two hip hop artists. Him, lyricist, you know, myself, spoken word artist in the, you know, the hip hop persuasion with the spoken word. And then I moved into DJing and music production, and, you know, John's moved into music production also. Just this love of hip hop. And initially what was ideas and conversations about taking in these workshops and programs into schools to deliver hip hop in a holistic sense, so young people got an idea of this culture that they're already part of. They're already writing bars on their phones. They're already dressing in a way which connects with what hip hop is. They're already speaking in a way which connects with what hip hop is. But actually giving them the full context of that, and then showing them how they can use that to help them on their journey, was where it started. And again, intelligent movement, I know why I move. I think that's where it started from. Like, real intent about, this is where I want to get to, as we've been speaking about. On this journey, I want to get to this certain place. But in order to get there, I need to know why I move. I need to have a clear purpose. I need to have a clear intention. I need to have a clear internal guidance system, as one of my mentors says. And it started there. And as we were doing all of that work, I know why I move, and we're developing programs to go into schools, and, you know, we ran these outdoor events in Ealing, you know, which were arts events, which brought in a little bit of martial arts from my martial arts experience, and brought in yoga and all these different fun things for young people to take part in during the half term. We then moved into a space where actually we were confronted by the difficulties and the real challenges we were facing, both mentally, emotionally, think those two things, as two men running this organization, two black men running this organization, and we were aware like these are real difficulties that we're facing, and we're speaking about them, we're talking about them, we're having conversation about them, and then it's almost like we have a conversation that kind of just stops. It's like we have a conversation about it, we're talking about mental health, we're talking about the stuff that doesn't normally get spoken about, and then it stops, and then we're just continuing with the work that we're doing. And there was a moment in my living room where John and I had a very emotional encounter with each other. Yeah, it was super, super deep. It was super vivid, super visceral. And following on from that moment, we've termed it the work, which is a term that's obviously used when we're talking about doing like deeper healing work. And that conversation, that encounter that we had was super tense at points. We were engaged in a very heated debate and argument about something. And by the time we got to the end of that heated debate argument, all of the conversations we'd had about mental health and all the things before were right there. You know, we're right there. And we were left in this space of like, what is our brotherhood? Like, who are we? Do you know what I mean? Like, what is our connection when we then go into schools? You know, how do we show up to each other before we go and do that work? Because actually that's going to play out in the soul or the energy of the work that we do. So then we started embarking upon, you know, being in wellbeing circles ourselves, started attending wellbeing circles, first online. I was attending some wellbeing circles, then I started to attend some in person. And then there was this retreat that I went on, a couple of retreats that I went on actually, in order to just get away from London. It's nice to just get away from London from time to time, as we know, get away from the cold into the warmth. And again, being in a different space shifted something in my mind, shifted something in my spirit to now think about how I was showing up differently. If I'm about service, if I'm about I know why I move, and I'm actually just like trying to grasp that sometimes, but actually it's not fully embedded, then taking part in these retreats, taking part in this work really allowed that to embed in me, which is now I'm like super clear about why I move the way I move, why I talk the way I talk, why I'm passionate about the things I'm passionate, why I stay out of conversations that I don't need to be in, you know? And from being in those spaces, I just realised that actually I was one of very few black men in those spaces. And I was obviously leaving London to enter these spaces. So actually I was like, what's happening back home in London, in the ends, you know, where the brothers are, like where we are, do you know what I mean? Where we're working in these spaces, where we're dealing with all of these different things we're dealing with. But actually there's no space for us to try and navigate this stuff amidst all of the biases, the unconscious bias and the racism and all of that stuff that goes on in education that we're aware of. And I said, cool, like I want to be able to run this retreat, this space, firstly at wellbeing circles, specifically for black men, Mandems Quarters. And that started and that was beautiful. And we did that for 6 months. We did 2 sessions a month, fortnightly. That was beautiful. Space for black and brown men to come together online, go through a check-in process, an open sharing and a checkout process. An hour and a half. And then actually had the vision back then, before that even started, to actually run a retreat, and to run the retreat at a reduced rate. Just because these things already, from what I'm aware, from my experience sometimes seeing these things, where I was once upon a time, was that's not for me. That thing where you're going to be talking about your emotions and talking about all of the stuff that's going on, and it's not for me. And I was aware actually that could be a limitation or a barrier to the black men that I wanted to serve, and brothers that I knew who would benefit from something like this, and conversations I was having with men like yourself even at the time around some of these things, and like just thinking about all the different things I could take out that would just make it, I guess not easier, but like more of a simple process to be a part of. So the Mandems Quarters retreat was born, man, and my work now is about that. It's about the intersection of arts is like a key focus, well-being as a key focus, education and empowerment, you know, and like working in those spaces and being holistic, truly. I think that word, I sometimes use it, and sometimes I even wonder if I'm really like grasping the fullness of what that is. Do you know what I mean? Like the wholeness of what it means to be a real artist and to really embody the wholeness of that. To be a well-being practitioner and what that means to be in that space. To be an educator and to be in that space. And then to be, you know, someone who believes in empowerment across all of those different works and things that I do. So actually, there's so much that I learn from each of those spaces that serves the other. And it's a beautiful journey, and I'm really, really grateful to have gone through certain experiences that I've faced both personally and professionally to now get to this point where I have clarity around my company's focus, but even more so what my focus is and who I want to work with and who I don't want to work with, and what my cause is and what my mission is and what my vision is for the world and for myself. You know?
Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely reflects for me in the work that you do. You know, like for me, seeing it, you know, that is definitely, if I could explain it like that, that's definitely how I would kind of explain it like that, you know, because it definitely is really, there wasn't as much of it as needed. You know, like, even going back to even like what we were saying before, another thing what we was going to top on as well is, touch on, is the rites of passage. You know, is like a massive thing for me as well. That's like, as a community, we used to have.
Yeah.
You know, now we don't have. You know, I mean, there are some people who are still doing a lot of work in that space. So, credit to them. You know, but it's still not as widespread as it kind of should be. You know, having those kind of clear boundaries. You know, those clear kind of transitional boundaries. You know, of adding those rituals as well, movement rituals to say I'm here, now I'm going to there. You know, which is kind of really important. When I think when you don't have that, it can lead to a lot of confusion. A lot of times you see people, speak to people, for me they're just almost like drifting, bouncing around, not quite knowing where they're actually at, where they locate themselves. You know, where for me when you have those kind of clear rituals, you know, like to say I am whoever. You know, I mean, I mean, you kind of have it in regards to education a little bit, I'd imagine. You know, if you're studying to be a doctor, you know, and I imagine you get that. But I think, you know, I mean, as a community, I said there's so much things that are lacking. You know, there's so much things that are missing, and I think some of the stuff that you are providing are bringing a lot of that stuff back. You know, most importantly for me, those spaces, you know, where men can be men. You know, because a lot of that for me gets lost in kind of today's world that we live in. You know, I think because as a man in kind of society, you wear multiple hats at different times. You know, so you be a brother, a father, or a son. You're an employee. You might be an owner, whatever. There's multiple versions of yourself. There's multiple things that you're doing. You know, on a kind of weekly basis. You know, and I think in and amongst that kind of rat race, a lot can get lost. You know, so you need those spaces for me where people can just excel, breathe, you know, be, you know, really get in touch, and even just to even feel that the feeling of kind of solidarity for me, which is like really important as well, because I think the journey can feel isolating. Isolated. You know, I think you go through our daily lives, our daily works, and you feel isolated, sometimes not connected to a lot, you know. And I think them spaces for me are important to feel connected, to feel like to hear someone share something and you identify with. You know what? Yeah, no, I get that. I understand that. You know, I'm not alone. And it's a similar process that I see when I was facilitating groups with young people. It's some of the same things that happen in those groups, where you have those kind of penny drop moments where they work out, actually, no, it's not just me, because especially some of the negative stuff, sometimes when you feel like it's just you then become start to demonize yourself. Like we look at yourself a certain way, thinking, you're the only person that does that. The moment you bring it out into the open, you have to work out, no, it's not just me. It's human. Like it doesn't make it good, but it just means that I don't need to demonize myself for it. I don't need to punish myself for it. I can look at myself, I can look at it for what it is and try and now work with it, work through it, work to a different place with it, a different place of understanding, different place of awareness, and that can have, for me, really massive impacts on the relationships that we have as well, so a lot of people in that space, for example, well, not a lot of people, but some of them are fathers, which is one of the most important relationships that you can have, is that kind of paternal, maternal kind of relationship, and I think a lot of people are striving to do the best they can do with the tools that they have, but some of them are just not aware that some of the tools are not great. Some of the tools are a bit rusty. Some of those tools are tools that was given to you from somebody else. They said it was a good tool. Doesn't mean it's a good tool. So you need to kind of move forward, move past that, and I think you only, for me, get the learnings when you get into these wider spaces, have these wider conversations, and I think ultimately that's how we grow, and do better. Because I think I was someone who kind of grew up pre kind of smartphone. Those things were more prevalent in those times, and that for me is one of the greatest tricks of the smartphone for me, is that you're connected and disconnected at the same time. It's like an illusion. You can physically see hundreds of people, so you may feel connected, but you're not actually connected to them hundreds of people. You're actually disconnected. Another reason why you're disconnected, because it's your emotional kind of management, that you're not actually, what you're seeing isn't real. So you've been fed false information continuously and making judgments kind of based on that. You're taking the humanness out of the experience. Like being able to look someone in the eyes, being able to hear how that person's breathing. There's so much other stuff that just gets lost. And that's why you see so much conflicts, for example, arise via WhatsApps and stuff like that as well, because it's like no one knows what they mean all the time. You always have to be explicit, and even I find myself sometimes in that space where I feel like I'm being over explicit because the medium is just gonna strip back everything else. I feel like, I need to, what do they call it, mansplain. I need to actually explain this or over explain. And I think sometimes when you over explain, sometimes you can lose the emotion. So
what are we without our emotion, man? Like,
yeah.
do you know what I mean? We could often be, it's either we have our emotion and we're aware of it, or we avoid it. Do you know what I mean? And we try to suppress it. And it's a choice. We know it's a choice. It's like, it's tragic. Do you know what I mean? I could come back to that again, that use of that word again. But it's tragic when the thought of having emotion or expressing emotion connects somebody with being soft. Or all of the other words. Do you know what I mean?
It's like a boogeyman almost. For a lot of people. I did a lot of work in that space, and I remember what it always used to say to me is, am I here to control my emotions? And it always used to resonate with me, that it's like they feel their emotions are something to be controlled because someone's told them that, not something to experience, not something. It's not a being. It's like something to control. Like, so this is bad. Now put that in a box like a prisoner. Put that in a cage. Learn how to let that out at certain times or not let it out. All those types of things, that those messages that are kind of reinforced. When obviously the key isn't to cage it. It's to be able to be with it, to understand, To not like it's like experiential more than anything. You know, it's not how a lot of people see it, and obviously from a masculine perspective, that's where it gets even worse as well, because obviously those things are reinforced. You know, those narratives as a man, this is what you do as a man. You do that, and I think like as a society we've come a lot better with that. You know, when I think about men I've seen throughout the ages, the men have become a lot more expressive with their emotions, become a lot more aware of their emotions, become a lot more aware of their emotions, how they impact their behavior, how they impact their environment. You know, when I look back at, for me, generations above, they didn't exist. You know, a lot of people in let's say my granddad's generation, for example, that level for me were quite stoic and stern, and it was discipline, it was this, and they would crack joke, and they'd have their little things, you know, in their circles, but ultimately, being a man was monolithic. It was one way, that was the way. You know, and I think we are getting to a better place in society of understanding that no, it's not one way. There's multiple ways. You know, it's not just one way to skin a cat, as they say. But yeah, no, into the last time. So yeah, no, thank you for coming. You know, thank you for the, you know what I mean, the conversation and all that. It's definitely been an enlightening. You know, it's been rich conversation. You know, I know we had a lot of things that we said we was gonna do that we haven't done.
Part 2, man.
Which is part 2, definitely. That has to come. It's just a testament, you know, to the work that you're doing. You know, and it's really just, you know what I mean, that for me, just keep up the work. You know what I mean, keep going, because it's much needed. So yeah, no, to part 2.
Come on, man. And big up yourself also. It's a part of the reason, I always say this to you when we're speaking on the phone or when I see you in person, but part of the reason why I've got to the point where I've got to is witnessing and seeing you.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I'm going to say it right here, right now, to just honour you and the work that you're doing, brother. Because I see you, man, and it continues to inspire me on my journey.
No worries,
and to be invited onto your podcast is a true honour and a blessing, man. So,
no worries, man.
Thank you, bro.
Thanks, man. Yeah, that's it. Can you...